You have always been the container, the vessel, the one people drift toward like moths seeking the only lantern in a pitch-black forest. You listen to their tragedies, you absorb their anxieties, and you metabolize their pain so they don't have to. You have built an identity on being the strong one, the listener, the healer who can walk into a room and immediately sense the shifting atmospheric pressure of human emotion. But lately, something has shifted. There is a terrifying new sensation growing behind your ribcage. It isn't sadness, and it certainly isn't compassion. It is a cold, metallic heaviness, a profound, absolute exhaustion that feels less like tiredness and more like a biological rejection of other human beings. You are standing at the precipice of a psychological event that Carl Jung described as one of the most dangerous yet necessary transitions in the human experience. You are afraid that you are becoming a sociopath. You are afraid because yesterday, when your friend cried in front of you, you didn't feel a tug of sympathy. You felt nothing. Or worse, you felt a flicker of repulsion. You are asking yourself if you are broken. Whatever you think this is, burnout, depression, or a sudden loss of humanity, you are wrong. Jung identified this phenomenon not as a breakdown, but as a violent correction of the soul. You are experiencing what I call the Empathic Nullification Event. It is the moment the psyche slams the door shut to prevent the total dissolution of the self. It is the day the empath snaps, and while it feels like a death, Jung would argue it is the only way you can possibly survive what comes next. To understand why you are currently feeling this chilling detachment, we must look at the architecture of your mind through both the lens of Jungian depth psychology and the cold, hard facts of modern neuroscience. For years, you have been operating under a mechanism of hyper-functioning mirror neurons. In the human brain, these neurons fire when we observe an action or emotion in another, allowing us to simulate their experience. For the average person, this is a subtle hum. For you, it has been a deafening roar. You have spent your life in a state of chronic neuroaffective permeability. You haven't just been observing others, you have been neurologically hijacked by them. Every time you held space for someone, your cortisol spiked, your amygdala flared, and your body prepared for a threat that wasn't yours. Carl Jung warned against this indiscriminate merging with others. He spoke of psychic infection, where the unconscious contents of one person, their traumas, their shadows, their unintegrated rage, leak into the unconscious of another. You thought you were being kind. Jung would say you were being possessed. You have been acting as a sponge for the collective shadow of your environment, filtering out the toxins of those around you until your own psychic filter became clogged with a sludge that isn't yours. The snap you are feeling now is your psyche's emergency brake. It is a concept Jung referred to as Enantiodromia, the tendency of things to change into their opposites. When a conscious attitude becomes too extreme, the unconscious rises up to compensate. You have been too open, too giving, too understanding. So the unconscious has sent you the antidote: absolute, impenetrable coldness. This brings us to one of the most terrifying case studies in the annals of depth psychology, a case that mirrors your current struggle with haunting precision. Jung often spoke of the golden child or the selfless mother archetypes encountering their own darkness, but let us look at the case of a patient we shall call Elias. Elias was a man of impeccable reputation, a pillar of his community, a mediator, a man who could not say no because he believed his value existed only in his utility to others. He was the classic empath. He felt the mood of a room before he entered it. He managed the emotional volatility of his wife, the demands of his colleagues, and the anxieties of his children with the grace of a saint. He was entirely identified with his persona, the mask of the good man. But the brain keeps a score that the conscious mind tries to ignore. Underneath this benevolence, Elias was developing what I define as the resentment cyst. This is a psychological structure formed when authentic aggression is swallowed repeatedly to maintain peace. Every time Elias smiled when he wanted to scream, Every time he offered help when he was drowning, the cyst grew. One afternoon, Elias came home to find a minor domestic chaos, a spilled bottle of milk, a trivial argument between family members. It was a scene he had de-escalated 1,000 times before, but on this day, the Enantiodromia struck. Elias didn't yell, he didn't cry, he simply sat down in the center of the room and entered a state of catatonic dissociation. He stopped speaking, he stopped moving. When his family screamed for a reaction, he looked at them with eyes that were described as dead glass. He had not lost his mind, he had simply resigned from his role. Jung's analysis of such cases reveals a terrifying truth. Elias had fallen into the grip of the shadow. The shadow is everything we deny in ourselves, our selfishness, our cruelty, our desire for power, and yes, our indifference. Because Elias had refused to integrate small amounts of healthy selfishness into his life, the shadow hoarded it all until it possessed him completely. He didn't just become selfish, he became obliterated by the need for isolation. You are likely hovering at the edge of this same abyss. You are terrified of your own coldness because you have been conditioned to believe that empathy is your only redeeming quality. But modern neuroscience tells us that the brain's anterior insula, the region involved in empathy, can actually downregulate during periods of extreme social stress to protect the organism. You are not becoming a monster, you are entering a state of protective apathy. However, if you do not understand what is happening, this state can become permanent. Jung warned that if we do not voluntarily interact with our shadow, it will direct our life and we will call it fate. The danger you face right now is not that you have stopped caring, but that you are interpreting this natural recoil as a moral failure rather than a biological imperative. You are fighting the cure. To navigate this, we must dissect the anatomy of the snap. We must break down the specific stages of this descent so you can locate exactly where you are on the map of the unconscious. Jungian analysis suggests that before the final severance occurs, the psyche gives us warnings, tremors before the earthquake. The first stage is what I call the somatic rejection. This occurs long before the mind realizes something is wrong. It manifests physically. You begin to feel a distinct exhaustion when around specific energy vampires in your life. You might develop inexplicable headaches, sudden drops in blood sugar, or a physical need to cross your arms and legs, literally closing off your body circuit. Your prefrontal cortex is signaling that your cognitive resources are depleted. You ignore this. You drink more coffee. You force the smile. You tell yourself you are just tired. This leads to the second stage, the interpretive distortion. This is where the shadow begins to bleed into your perception. The people you once loved and helped start to look grotesque to you. You begin to see their needs not as cries for help, but as parasitic demands. You notice their mouth moving, but you don't hear words, you hear noise. This is a projection of your own starved inner child raging against the parent role you have forced yourself into. You are projecting your own neediness onto them, and because you despise your own neediness, you despise them. Then comes the third stage, the one you are likely in right now, the empathic void. This is the terrifying silence. The specific person or group of people you have been carrying suddenly mean nothing to you. It is as if a cord has been cut. You look at them and wonder how you ever felt anything at all. This is the danger zone. This is where the empath, terrified by their own lack of feeling, often overcompensates by doubling down on their nice behavior, engaging in a performative masquerade that drains the last reserves of their life force. Jung would tell you to stop. He would tell you that this void is sacred ground. It is the Nigredo phase of alchemy, the blackening, the decomposition. The old self, the one who lived only for others, is rotting, and you must let it rot. If you attempt to resuscitate the old self now, if you panic and try to drag that rotting, people-pleasing persona back onto the stage, you will not return to who you were. You will devolve into something far worse. Jung called this the regressive restoration of the persona, a desperate act of cowardice where the individual patches up the cracks in their mask with bitterness and passive aggression. This is the fate of the empath who refuses to snap. They become the martyr. They continue to give, but every act of kindness is now laced with a hidden, poisonous demand for repayment. They become the suffering saint who sighs loudly while cleaning up the mess, the one whose silence is weaponized to make everyone around them feel small. This is not empathy, it is emotional blackmail disguised as virtue. To avoid this fate, you must do the one thing your entire conditioning screams against. You must lean into the coldness. You must allow the empathic nullification to do its surgical work. You are not losing your ability to love. You are undergoing a neurological recalibration of your boundary systems. This brings us to the phase of integration, or what I call the installation of the sovereign gatekeeper protocol. In the depths of his red book, Jung engaged in active imagination with his own soul, often encountering figures that were terrifying or dismissive. He realized that the psyche is not a democracy, it is a kingdom, and for years you have left the drawbridge down and the castle unguarded. You have allowed any passing traveler with a sad story to loot your treasury. The snap is simply the sound of the portcullis slamming shut. To integrate this new, darker state, you must understand the neuroscience of your own guilt. When you first start saying no, or worse, when you simply stop responding to emotional cues, your brain's anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, will light up. This is the error detection center of the brain. For your entire life, harmony equaled safety, dissonance equaled danger. So, when you stop fixing people, your ACC screams that you are making a fatal error. It floods your system with cortisol, creating a visceral sense of badness. You feel physically ill, you feel like a villain. You must reframe this sensation. This is not the feeling of doing something wrong. It is the feeling of breaking a neural addiction to external validation. You are going through withdrawal. The method for surviving this is to practice what I define as clinical detached observation. When the wave of guilt hits you because you didn't ask your coworker what was wrong, or because you let a phone call go to voicemail, do not engage with the story the guilt is telling you. Do not argue with it. Simply observe the biological sensation. Watch your pulse rise. Watch your stomach tighten. And then do absolutely nothing. This is the hardest thing you will ever do. Jung called this holding the tension of the opposites. You feel the urge to help, the thesis, and the repulsion of the snap, the antithesis. If you hold both without acting, a third thing emerges, the synthesis. This synthesis creates a new archetype, the Dark Empath, not in the pop psychology sense of a manipulator, but in the Jungian sense of an integrated feeler. The integrated feeler does not absorb emotion, they witness it. They have developed selective porosity. Consider the function of a cell membrane in biology. If a cell wall is too hard, the cell starves and dies. If it is too soft, the cell is invaded by pathogens and bursts. For years, you have been a cell with no wall. Now you are building the membrane. This membrane allows you to see the suffering of others, to understand it cognitively, but to refuse to let it metabolize in your own bloodstream. This transformation requires you to burn your contracts. Every empath has signed invisible, unconscious contracts with the people in their lives. I will be your therapist if you tell me I am good, or I will carry your anxiety if you promise not to leave me. These contracts are void. You must now operate under a new law, the law of energetic conservation. You will notice something unsettling as you adopt this law. People will fall away. The friends who only called when they were in crisis will stop calling. They will sense the change in your neurochemistry. Mirror neurons are a two-way street. Just as you used to feel their pain, they can now feel your barrier. They will intuitively know that the food source has been cut off. They might accuse you of changing, of being cold or different. Accept these accusations as accolades. In the alchemical process, this is the albedo, the whitening. After the black rotting of the Nigredo, the ash is purified. You are being stripped of the parasites. You are finding out who actually loves you and who only loved your utility. Jung taught that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. but he neglected to mention that the process of becoming who you are is destructive. It destroys the false peace. It destroys the comfortable illusions of your relationships. It requires you to look into the mirror and see the shadow, the part of you that is selfish, the part of you that wants to be left alone, the part of you that is capable of aggression, and invite it to the table. Why? Because a harmless person is not a good person. A harmless person is just weak. A good person is a dangerous person who has their danger under voluntary control. By suppressing your coldness, you rendered yourself harmless, and therefore your empathy became worthless. It was compulsive, not chosen. When you integrate the snap, you regain the power of choice. You can choose to engage, or you can choose to walk away. And because you can walk away, your choice to stay finally means something. We see this evolution in the final stages of the patient Elias. After weeks of his catatonic withdrawal, his snap, he did not return to his family as the same man. When he eventually spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave. The frenetic, high-pitched anxiety of the pleaser was gone. When his wife launched into a chaotic complaint, Elias didn't rush to fix it. He listened, he nodded, and he said, "That sounds difficult. What do you plan to do about it?" He handed the burden back. He refused to steal her suffering, and in doing so, he forced her to grow. This is the paradox of the shadow healer. Sometimes the most empathetic thing you can do for another human being is to coldly refuse to save them. You force them to find their own strength. But there is a final cosmic dimension to this shift that Jung hinted at in his later works, a connection between this psychological snapping point and the evolution of human consciousness itself. You're not just solving a personal neurosis. You're participating in a collective evolutionary leap. The era of the unconscious, herd-like merging is ending. We are moving into an era of individuated consciousness, where connection can only happen between two whole, separate sovereign beings, not two broken halves trying to complete each other. Your exhaustion is evolutionary data. It is your soul telling you that the old way of being human is obsolete. You are being pushed into the next stratum of awareness. As you stand in the wreckage of your old personality, looking at the debris of the relationships that couldn't survive your boundaries, you might feel a lingering sadness. Let it be there, but do not mistake it for regret. You are simply grieving the death of a slave. The entity that is rising from that ash is the master of its own house. You have survived the infection. You have survived the cure. Now you must learn how to live with the power. See you in the next dimension.